And let's continue with the sixth chapter of The Whispering Mountain. We're back with Erebus and her father in the wagon. She's been giving away salves and medicines all day, including to a particularly hairy little person that paid with gold. Um, she asked about her father's meeting with the Seljuk, and her dad did not quite understand why she was so interested, and now she's very happy that Owen was not seen by him. She was worried, too, about Owen. The miserable, defeated set of shoulders as he walked away after Brother Ianto had made her heart ache with compassion. Restlessly turning on her pallet, she resolved to go down to Brother Ianto's cave first thing next morning and talk over what was best for Owen to do next. At last she drifted off into a troubled sleep and dreamed that the Marquis, smiling with wolf's fangs, was holding the harp just out of Owen's reach while he hit it with a hammer. "He'll break it!" Erebus muttered, half sitting up in bed. Then she realized that the tapping sound she had heard was in fact someone knocking on the door of the wagon. Could it be Owen? Pulling on her dress, she tiptoed past Tom, who had fallen asleep with his head resting on a pile of poetry. Outside the door she found the same tiny bearded man who had earlier given her the lump of gold. "What is the trouble with you now, sir?" Erebus asked, sleepily rubbing her eyes. "Late hours you do keep, indeed." "Hush, not to wake my dada, if you please. I will step outside." Once she was down the steps, the little man gave a tug at her arm. In his eyes she caught such an urgent, pleading, beseeching look that she guessed something was badly amiss. It did not seem to be connected with himself. Indeed, his cough appeared much better for the draught she had given him. "Wait you one moment, then," whispered Erebus gently. Both she and her father were accustomed to be called out at night from time to time. She put on her warm red cloak with the hood, packed up a basket of the remedies most frequently called for, casually covered Tom with a patchwork quilt, and scribbled a hasty note. "Gone out to patient. Back soon. Your loving daughter, Erebus." Then she caught up the horn lantern and slipped out again to where the little man was patiently waiting. To her surprise, he led her not in the direction of the town, but up toward the quarry face along a narrow path among bushes, and at length paused before one of the larger cave openings, giving her a measuring look. "In there," said Erebus, somewhat taken aback. "Da Chui! Where are you taking me, friend?" But the man, evidently deciding that she was not too tall to enter the cave, pulled her forward again, without answering, and they went inside. Erebus was not alarmed, but she was greatly interested, for she began to suspect that her unusual client must be one of the little fairy-like beings, the Tilwith Teg, or Fur people, who were thought to dwell in the caves of the mountain. Up to now she had been inclined to consider them nothing but a legend invented by the timid and credulous inhabitants of Nantagardau, but the little man certainly answered their description in many particulars. She found it hard to believe, though, that he would suddenly pull her into a bottomless chasm, or disappear, leaving her lost in the bowels of the mountain, or turn into a flaming dragon and devour her. His hand, pulling her along, was warm and seemed human enough. Though he did not speak, she felt instinctively that he was friendly toward her and could be trusted. And, after all, he had swallowed her medicine, and it had done him good. That was another proof, Erebus thought, that he was not one of the Berethu Mamu, the little blessed people. If he had been, surely he would have no need of human remedies. This cave, unlike the one Owen had entered in search of the harp, did not come to an end, but struck downhill, deep into the mountains, growing wider and higher as it descended. The horn lantern threw so small a circle of light that Erebus could catch no more than a glimpse now and then of rock walls sparkling with crystals, and occasionally a great cluster of stalactites, like icicles of stone dangling from the roof overhead. The floor was hard, and their steps echoed hollowly as they proceeded. The air, as in all caves of the Whispering Mountain, was warm and steamy. Presently her guide came to a halt in what seemed to be a large chamber at the bottom of the tunnel. He put his fingers between his lips and whistled shrilly. Almost at once another man, equally small and hairy, appeared out of the dark, blinking at the lantern, as if he were distressed by its light. The two men conferred together in a musical foreign language. Then the second one tugged forward a pair of animals, which he had been leading. Erebus nearly dropped her basket at the sight of them, for in the whole of her life she had never laid eyes on such peculiar-looking creatures. They were about the size of donkeys, but had big, flat, shuffling, padded feet instead of hooves. Their necks were long and swaying, their backs curiously bumpy, their expressions sardonic, and they were covered with long, shaggy black fur, which was molting here and there. Some of the looser hanks were tied with bits of string that smelt strongly and disagreeably of fish. Her guide gestured her forward. Erebus realized that she was expected to climb on to one of these animals. Each wore a sort of saddle adopted to the strange shape of their backs. The second man thumped them with his fist, and they knelt down on the rock, making a noise, half snarl, half snuffle, which gave Erebus little confidence in their good intentions. However, she mounted, perching her basket and lantern in front of her. There was a bump convenient for this purpose on the animal's back. Her guide also mounted, calling out some word of command, and the other man stood back. The creatures heaved up awkwardly on their feet and set forward into the dark. Their flat pads made little sound on the rock, and Erebus found it hard to judge exactly how fast they were going, but it seemed very fast indeed. Their method of progress was to lurch forward until they were almost ready to topple over, and then right themselves at the last minute. She soon felt as if her bones were being pulled apart. She had often bestridden Galahad or the mountain ponies, but this was utterly different, and the most uncomfortable ride she had ever taken. "I believe I know what these beasts are like," she presently thought, peering at the long, flexible neck and rather sheep-like head in front of her. "There's a picture in one of Dada's books about foreign lands. Camels. That is it. They are like camels." She had pronounced the last word aloud, and to her surprise, for she had given up expecting her companion to speak to her, he suddenly gave a flashing smile, nodding his head up and down. "Camel! Camel!" he agreed, thumping his steed. "Are they really camels? But how do camels come to be here under the mountain? That is a strange thing, surely," he answered in his own incomprehensible tongue. She would have liked to ask more. Why were the camels so small and dwarfish, their bumps flattened out? And how was it they could see in the dark? But there seemed little point in asking if she did not understand his answers. Owen will know, she thought. Very likely in his little book of knowledge it will be giving the whole explanation. But camels underground in Wales. Who would have thought it indeed? Meanwhile, the camels had been speeding along with apparently endless straight level along an apparently endless, straight-level underground passage which ran alongside an underground river. Erebus, while not exactly alarmed, began to be somewhat anxious because they were covering such a distance. "At this rate," she thought, "it will be daybreak before I so much as reach my patient, and gracious to goodness knows when I shall get back home again. Dada will have to see to his own breakfast." She was not afraid that Tom would be worried about her. She knew him better than that. If she were to be absent for a week together, he would do little more than lift his head from his poetry and murmur, "Dear, dear, Erebus not back yet, then," before dashing down another verse. After an interminably long ride, during which Erebus was about to doze a little, holding on to the pommel of her saddle, the tunnel brought them into a vast cavern, which was illuminated by clusters of pale phosphorescent light hanging far above. They were still following the course of the river, which crossed the floor of the cave in a deep channel. The water, running smooth and silent, was a pale milky green, cloudy but most beautiful, and was evidently hot. Wreaths of steam rose from its surface. Far ahead, Erebus could see a series of massive pipes, like those of some enormous church organ, which ran up the cave wall and were lost to view in the gloom overhead. The river appeared to flow into these pipes. But how the water was persuaded to run perpendicularly upward, Erebus could not imagine, nor where this great underground hall could be. They must, she was sure, be very far from Nantagardoo, perhaps beneath Forest Maiev. Now they left the river and entered a narrow, dark opening concealed among rocks, where they came to a halt. The guide made signs that Erebus must dismount here. She was not sorry to do so. No sooner had she slid stiffly down than yet another small dark figure appeared and led the camels away into the shadows, while her companion, again respectfully taking her hand, drew her along a narrow track, which, climbing at a steeper and steeper angle, presently changed to a flight of rude stairs, cut in the thickness of the rock. One thing soon began to puzzle Erebus very much, and alarm her a little. The rock here seemed to vibrate, as if constantly battered by some powerful force, and she could hear a sort of booming hum, which sometimes became very loud. This noise abated slightly as they climbed, and presently a little daylight could be seen ahead. After several turns in the stair, they came to a cleft in the rock wall. Erebus stood on tiptoe and looked through this hole, in hope of discovering where she was. "Whew!" she exclaimed in utter astonishment. "No wonder I was thinking it was a long way. Fast go as these camels of yours are. Indeed to goodness!" Straight ahead, nothing could be seen but greenish dawn sky, with a couple of silvery seagulls floating across it. But